Good day and welcome back to another Dbz Dokkan battle video. In this video we're going to be taking on Red Zone Boujack. So yeah, basically we're going to be taking on Red Zone Boujack. It's pretty, I want to say pretty intense. It's a pretty tough stage. It's especially quite tough if you are using the Ginyu Force. Boujack can lock you in place, which causes you a little bit of issues. And by a little bit I mean quite a lot of issues, which isn't impossible to work around, but it is a little bit rough, at least in theory. It can definitely cause you some issues. So let's talk about Boujack, and then let's maybe talk about the team build. Obviously using a variation with Ginyu Force again, because that's like when you don't have the new 7th year anniversaries, I kind of have to resort to using Ginyu Force or Hybrid Sands. Try to use Hybrid Sands as well when I can. Very strong team. Power Beyond Super Saiyan or a Pure Saiyan's team also kind of tends to work alright in some situations, so I'm definitely going to have to try that one. But yeah, overall, Boujack's pretty tough. So to run through Boujack as a unit, or as a challenge I guess, your big challenge, or your two big challenges that come in. First phase, they're all immune to stunning. You've got to face 4 enemies. Now they don't hit too hard, they hit it around the 230-ish mark I think with type disadvantage. But the main issue is super attacks. You can be super attacked from 4 different typings. These stages generally always cause people a lot of problems. Bringing sealers will help you a lot in these fights. It's going to help you quite a bit. But it can be pretty challenging. It can be relatively quite challenging. It's always difficult when there's an opportunity to take type disadvantage super attacks. What I always suggest is try and eliminate the units that cause you the most problems. Like, so for example, there's no AGL type unit here. So I don't, my strength units are fine in inverted commas. So what I do is I try and prioritize taking out, the tech unit, the Zangya. Try and prioritize taking her out, basically eliminate her, and then move on to Gokua, and then move on from there. So like just slowly eliminating the biggest threats. Take out the tech units. The Ginyu is safe, so you can stack in confidence. Take out the strength unit, so the physical LR and Raccoon are safe, and then obviously just focus on removing everything else. So yeah, generally speaking, that's what you want to do when you're facing multiple enemies like this. Don't split your damage, rather just take out the biggest threats, and then that will enable you to have a bit of a better time overall, at least in terms of preventing major super attack damage. Once you've done that, you can then kind of prioritize the rest of the stage, which I think is pretty good, and you'll be able to have a little bit of a better time in terms of the stage itself. So yeah, overall pretty solid, pretty solid stuff. I must admit, it wasn't too hard. There were a couple times where I got caught out with super attacks. So twice I ended up on the tech Boujack stage. One thing you do have to do with the Ginyu Force is you need to make sure that Ginyu stacks, and you need to save your Whis items if possible. Both items need to be saved for the final phase. You'll see here you'll see here that I'm using the Planet Namek Extreme Unit buff support item. That gives all Planet Namek units 15% extra. I've toyed with using this or using the bomber. Either way, the heal or the 15% is pretty solid. Generally speaking, I like to use the 15% if I'm bringing units that don't seem to have enough going on with them in terms of overall strength. I think it's just generally a pretty solid call, and one that I think overall is it's gonna help me out. Like the 15% is a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it can make a big difference. It's the difference between a unit taking 20k on a normal attack and taking 0. And it can really ramp up, especially with stuff like stacking on Ginyu and things like that. It can really speed up his process. So for this fight, I actually found that using the 15% bonus really aided Ginyu. He stacked a lot faster. I got to the threshold he kind of needed to be at. You need to be very, very tough on the Ginyu stacking. It's very, very important because the phase against Boujack has a couple of things that will go against you. But in terms of the end phase, there's nothing too crazy about it. So he'll randomly change key spheres, which is, it's painful, but it's not the end of the world. He has a 5% evasion chance. He can do attack and defense lowering. He's immune to super attack, sealing, and immune to stunning. He's N-type, so generally speaking, the only real units at risk are tech-type units. You don't need a tech-type unit at all throughout this event, so unless you're running the Power Beyond Super Saiyans team, and you obviously running that double tech lead or anything like that, you don't need a tech unit. You're not facing an AGL phase, you're not facing an AGL unit, you're not doing anything like that, so I would suggest avoiding an AGL unit if entirely possible. A tech unit if entirely possible, just because it's not really super conducive to damage or anything like that. But again, it is entirely up to you. For me at least, you should be fine. Ginyu here tanking perfectly well. Ginyu has to get up to around 800k defense to survive a super attack from Tech Boujack. Tech Bojack's going to be a very hard fight for Ginyu Force runners. People who run Ginyu Force are going to have a rough time against Tech Boujack because of that simple fact that your main headline unit in your big damage dealer is AGL type. And it's where Ginyu's at his biggest disadvantage throughout all of the fights. Generally speaking, Ginyu's more than fine in a lot of fights because he's got favorable type advantage. He only faces tech enemies usually early on in the round. This and Janemba are very tough fights for Ginyu because Boujack gives a big tech opponent right at the end where, yes, Ginyu has stacked, but he can still take a lot of damage. Boujack can hit very, very hard and he locks into place. So it counters a lot of the viability of the Ginyu Force team because the big thing about the Ginyu Force team is that you have a lot of control over your tanking. Generally, Ginyu stacks fast enough that he exceeds the kind of damage thresholds of the bosses. Raccoon and Gilda are a very, very tanky unit. You usually have Raccoon, or you can run AGL Golden Frieza or Tech Golden Frieza. Your team generally is very safe damage-wise, which is why it's a team that a lot of people like to run so much, because it's very, very safe. The issue is that here, a lot of that is taken away from you, so it can cause a lot of AGL and Ginyu Force teams a lot of problems. Generally speaking, you don't have control. Your Raccoon and Gilda can be locked into a third slot, moved off rotation. Your Captain Ginyu can be locked in first slot, where he's going to take a lot of attacks. He's not going to be able to stack. So there's a lot of absence of control that can cause you issues. Again, also, Ginyu Force team is heavily dependent on Ginyu for a lot of the damage. If you don't have dupes in your Raccoon and Gilda and your Jace and Berta, they're not going to be doing a lot of damage. They don't do a lot of damage at 55%. I mean, 2.7 million is decent, but it's not huge. So when you're relying on a single unit to hit 5-6 million attack stats, obviously Ginyu being attack effective is really, really helpful. But when you rely on Ginyu to be a large portion of your damage, especially once he transforms, has that critical hit chance, you, generally speaking, struggle to kind of keep that damage up. And when you are running on a bit of a tight schedule because you don't want Ginyu to take a super attack, you have to be very, very careful about how you handle these situations. Now, fortunately, I managed to save 2 Whis, which is good. It leaves us in a very good position. We get unlucky that Ginyu is locked in the third and final slot, and sealed both turns, by the way. So even if Ginyu is locked in the third and final slot, it's not the end of the world. But he's sealed, which means he doesn't even get to stack, which, yep, is a lot of fun, because it would have been fine. He could have fired off 2 attacks, done some damage, and at least stacked a bit more defense. Now we're kind of like unable, I want to say, to stack that defense. Another big issue is you do have some units that are dependent on super attacks for their defense. So you'll see that here in this situation. So obviously we can see where the super attacks are coming from, but you can see that physical Ginyu is sealed. This is obviously a big issue because physical Ginyu relies a lot on his super attack to gain additional defense to handle tanking. So you're going to see him take some damage as well. Luckily, he's obviously got very high defense. We also have Jace on the rotation, which is giving him some support. But yeah, generally it's a very difficult fight because Boujack takes away a lot of player agency. You can have a turn where literally Boujack locks your worst unit in place and prevents them from super attacking. And all you can do is basically watch them die. Which I think is demoralizing for a lot of people. At least in most situations you have some kind of control, in a sense that you can go, okay, you know what, actually I am going to place this unit here, and you can live with what happens because of that action. When you sit in a situation where it's not so great, and you lose that ability to control where your unit's going, it can be very, very demoralizing, I think, and a lot of players will feel that. A lot of players will not enjoy that. It's not great. Obviously, we want to heal up a little bit here with AJ Ginyu. We also want to build up his ability to evade. As you can see, this is the friend Ginyu. He's at 708,000. Once he builds up his stacks, that defense will be a lot higher. And this is close to the threshold. I'm using a Whis. You still notice I'm using a Whis with 708,000 because if Ginyu takes a super attack here, he will take like 400k, which we just can't afford right now at this phase. It's something we can gamble on a little bit later, but right now we just want to let Ginyu get some attacks off, which he does, builds his defense a bit further, and then allows us to just kind of build up that evasion as well, and just take a couple more turns. Again, like I said, it's a phase and it's a mode where essentially you do need to be very, very careful. But yeah, overall, I think the team, I think the build, I think the team, I think everything went fine. I think once we got through the first phase without using an item, generally the end phase is kind of a free phase because you have Raccoon. You can just kind of leave there to build up his stacks. You have the physical Alog Ginyu who is more than fine floating around, giving everyone defense. Jace is also generally quite fine at that stage. So yeah, in that moment you're generally okay, and you don't have like too many issues, I want to say. That being said, obviously you do still technically have to be a little bit careful. But if you can get to this final phase with 2 items, generally Ginyu will continue to stack to the point where he's quite fine after the double Whis, especially if you don't get them locked and sealed in the third and final slot. And once he's at that point, you've got his double heals, you'll be able to transform him. No unit really should die. I mean, Jace will die if he gets super attacked. That is a thing, but you get very unlucky if you can't move Jace out of the way, because on the turns he's on, he has the ability to force these super attacks. So generally speaking, unless he gets locked, that's where it comes into play. If Jace gets locked into a position you can't move him out of, and he will take a super attack there, you're basically done. You're relying on him to evade or double super or even triple super. You just really basically you rely a little bit too much then on Jace and Jace's ability to evade or block the damage, and that's just not going to happen, unfortunately. But yeah, we get really, really lucky. Jace and Berta do really well in this stage. Obviously they have type advantage, which is very, very good for them. Just helps them to tank pretty well. They've also got that 50% evasion, which is awesome. Helps us out as well. As you can see, Ginyu got sealed, which is, yeah, pretty bad. Pretty bad. But it doesn't really matter too much. We managed to keep everything more than fine. Seal up the victory. At this point, we couldn't really lose. We have like a very small chance of losing. But generally we're quite fine. Obviously, there's always a chance to lose, which is why you'll see we don't even put Recruim into harm's way, because we don't want to lose. We want to guarantee the victory. And Recruim's propensity to not guard in the situations you need them to means I don't even take the risk of us potentially losing through that way. So yeah, overall it was a pretty good run. Recruim and Gildo tanking very, very well, and yeah, overall everything went fine. 171k is a lot, but at the end of the day, we managed to get the win. So yeah, that's Boujack. Pretty tough, pretty tough, I won't lie, especially running a Ginyu Force team. I think it's a very good test of your Ginyu Force team. I think Jace and Berta help a lot, and I think using the 15% Planet Namek buff was really quite helpful. It made the stacking just a lot faster, and just really helped to just push everyone's defenses over an ice threshold to make things a bit easier. So for me, I think that was a good call, personally speaking. Like I said though, if you are building a team for this, be aware that the final phase is tech, and if you bring AGL units, you could have a very bad time, especially if they rely on supering to get their defense, and they might be set up in a situation where they're locked in a slot where they're going to take damage. So be very, very mindful of that. And yeah, but if you enjoyed the video, guys, please leave a like on the video. I always appreciate it. Leave a comment if you need any help, and I'll see you next time. Bye.